So we finally replaced Excel, huh? New ERP system will automate workflows, improve visibility, and eliminate manual workarounds. Ugh, disgusting. Well, today we're learning how to create reports in the new system. Can it export to Excel? Well, yes, but okay, good. So there's still hope. Honestly, the dashboards are pretty cool. You know what else was cool? Blockbuster video. That spreadsheet looks really complicated. This spreadsheet has survived 3 CFOs, 2 acquisitions, a ransomware attack, and Kyle from procurement. The ERP system should now be the single source of truth. That's so adorable. Why don't the ERP numbers match finance? Well, it depends. Depends on what? Which spreadsheet? This is why we need to move from spreadsheets to a single ERP system. ERP systems come and go. Spreadsheets are forever. ERP systems come and go, but spreadsheets are forever. Unfortunately, Spreadsheet Guy is right about that. Welcome to episode 274 of Transformation Ground Control. That's the latest installment in the Spreadsheet Guy short video series out on TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube Shorts. Hope you've enjoyed that series, but in all seriousness, we all have a spreadsheet guy or gal, or maybe multiple ones in our organizations that are, on one hand, the heroes holding things together with duct tape and glue and staples and all that stuff, despite the crappy systems they have to work with. But on the other hand, they're the ones that are slowing down change. And oftentimes they're the ones that have tribal knowledge and knowledge that no one else has. And they're the most difficult ones to change at times. So that is the dichotomy of who Spreadsheet Guy is. So curious to hear from the audience, a Spreadsheet Guy, hero, or a villain, or both? Curious to hear. Drop it in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Again, this is episode 274 of Transformation Ground Control. My name is Eric Kimberling, CEO of Third Stage Consulting, and your host here today. This is a tech agnostic podcast that covers everything related to digital transformation. We've got a really fun show for you today, exciting show. We're going to have Jason Kurtz on the show. He is the CEO of Basware, and it's a company that provides invoice lifecycle management software. Now, before you tune out at the thought of invoice lifecycle management, which I'll be honest, I almost did. When I heard the term invoice lifecycle management, I thought, man, how much more mundane could this possibly be? I actually, as I talked to Jason, as I got to know his solution, got to know his company over the last few weeks leading up to today's podcast, I'm very excited for this conversation because it's a good reminder that there are so many fundamental things that organizations struggle with in their ERP implementations. We can talk about AI all we want. We can talk about cloud. We can talk about emerging tech. We can talk about predictive analytics, whatever you want to talk about. But at the end of the day, if we can't do basic stuff like invoicing, and we can't do it well, and we can't be compliant, and we can't stop the fraud, we can't stop the waste within our organizations, then why are we implementing technology? So what's really cool about this conversation is we're going to talk about invoice lifecycle management, but we're also going to talk about, even perhaps more importantly, we're going to talk about how you can extend the core of products like SAP and ERP. You can extend the core to do things better than the core product does, but without breaking the core. And so we'll talk about, yes, invoice lifecycle management, but we're also going to talk about ERP implementation strategies and how you can do that fit to standard cloud clean core concept without being limited by what the core technology can and can't do. So we'll talk to Jason later today. We're going to get some insights from Sapphire, some of the recent announcements from the SAP Sapphire conference, which has happened over the last couple of weeks in the US and in Spain. And we're also going to talk about some regulatory investigations happening in Europe related to Microsoft. So Microsoft is the latest enterprise tech vendor that's running into some concerns with regulators throughout the world. So we're going to talk about that. I'm going to share with you too, a letter that I wrote to the Competitive Markets Authority in the UK. They opened up commentary for people to opine on their thoughts around the market dynamics and whatnot. And for those of you that know, my recent book called Welcome to the Machine talks about the technology industry and some of the dysfunctions in the industry that span vendors, consultants, and customers. All 3 parties are doing dysfunctional things that lead to challenges and problems with digital transformations, not just the implementations themselves, but also the net after effects. So we're going to talk about all that in today's podcast, and I'm going to share with you the letter I wrote to the regulators just to provide my opinion on that and what I think is wrong and broken with the industry. So I'll share with you some of the highlights from that letter. We're going to cover all this and more. We'll take some audience questions. Got a lot to cover. Stick around. We're just getting started here on episode 274 of Transformation Ground Control.
Welcome to Transformation Ground Control. Ground Control. The podcast that covers everything related to digital transformation. Whether you're embarking on an ERP implementation, supply chain transformation, or any other business or digital transformation, this podcast is for you.
3, 2, 1.
Ground control to Major Tom.
Yes, hello, welcome. 274 is the episode we're on here, Transformation Ground Control. Thank you for being here. Glad to have you. Got a lot to cover here today. I'm really excited. I'm gonna start off by talking about what's happened at Sapphire the last couple weeks. As you may know, Sapphire was the SAP annual conference. It's in the U.S. and Spain. So last week it was in Spain. 2 weeks ago it was in the U.S. And a lot of pretty cool stuff is announced there. I'd love to hear from you in the comments. If you were at Sapphire, if you've been following what's happening with Sapphire, drop in the comments what you're most excited about, and I'll share with you some of my thoughts here. But this is their biggest event of the year, are these two Sapphire events. And the headline announcement was something that they're calling the autonomous enterprise. It's their new vision, which is AI agents running core business processes end to end with 50 or more Joule assistants that span finance, supply chain, procurement, HR, and customer experience. So they're finally starting to add some meat to this bone of Joule and what the assistants can do. Last year at Sapphire, they talked a lot about Joule, but this year it feels like there's a lot more substance. They obviously have a better understanding of what it is they want Joule to be, and they're starting to add some real use cases to Joule and where these assistants can be used in finance, supply chain, and other parts of the business. They also announced a new SAP Business AI platform with the Joule Studio, and they also introduced Knowledge Graph too. So some pretty cool stuff that they're doing. SAP has never really been short on new announcements and new innovations, and this year was no different. So having said all that, though, there's some genuinely interesting technology in these announcements. But before you get swept up in the marketing, here's a couple things that you need to know. SAP also announced more partnerships with Anthropic, AWS, Google Cloud, Microsoft, NVIDIA, and Palantir. So this is really interesting because SAP has always thrived on their partnerships and their ecosystem, but it feels like they're starting to be more open to partners, which is somewhat of a contradiction with SAP because on one hand, I've been critical myself over the years of SAP sort of closing off their ecosystem and not really playing nice with those that are not within their immediate ecosystem. But on the other hand, they're broadening that ecosystem. So it's sort of a double-edged sword, I suppose. I'd be curious to hear what you think. Do you think SAP is open, in terms of architecture and just as a company? Are they open to third parties that are not in the direct SAP sphere or ecosystem? I'd love to hear your feedback because this is, I think, a very controversial topic with strong arguments on both sides, and I'd love to hear both sides. But the translation here with these partnerships they've announced is that they're admitting they can't do it all themselves. They're admitting that S/4HANA can't be a one-size-fits-all solution, and they as a company, they being SAP, can't do it all themselves. And I think sometimes in the past, SAP has tried too hard to be everything to everyone and to try to satisfy everyone and to try to break into every industry, handle every function within a business. And I think they're recognizing that this world is moving so fast with AI and cloud, hyperscalers, companies like NVIDIA in the AI space, et cetera, et cetera. I think they're finally admitting and acknowledging that the market's moving fast, and the best way for them to stay relevant and to keep up with the changes is to partner with some of these other firms. So this is really important because the autonomous enterprise vision is real, but it's not going to happen overnight. It's something that's going to happen over 5 to 10 years. It's not something you just turn it on next quarter. You can't just say, okay, we announced it at Sapphire, we're going to enable autonomous enterprises and we're good to go. That's not at all how it works. And I think they're finally recognizing that. So really interesting stuff. And we're actually going to dive into more of the findings from Sapphire in some of the upcoming episodes. We're going to have some guests on the show that were at Sapphire as well. We'll get some of their take, some independent analysis and objective feedback from their findings there. So Be sure to stay tuned for future episodes of the show here in the coming weeks. But the second thing I want to talk about here today is, as it relates to SAP and Sapphire, is SAP's U-turn on on-prem. Now, this one is really big, in my opinion. It didn't get the headlines it deserves, in my opinion, either. But for years, SAP's CEO, Christian Klein, has said that AI innovation would only be available on the cloud and not available to ECC or on-prem S/4HANA customers. And that's something that always bothered me. It bothered some of our customers that, hey, we already bought this money. We spent all this money with SAP. Now they're telling us we can't take advantage of some of these cool new innovations they're doing, the Joule and AI and everything else. But that was the stick that was driving customers to go down the path of RISE. It was saying, hey, if you don't go with RISE, you don't commit to a migration path to cloud S/4HANA, then you're not going to get AI. All this cool stuff we're announcing looks good, but you don't get it unless you upgrade. And so that's been their strategy up until now. But at Sapphire this week, Klein essentially reversed that course. He said the Joule assistants and AI agents will now be available on-prem as long as you've committed to the cloud journey. So there's still that caveat of you have to have signed a contract. You have to be on board with this move to the cloud, which is really interesting because, on one hand, I commend them for opening things up a bit and softening their stance on the deployment of AI. But on the other hand, they're proving that they can offer AI to on-prem customers. They can, because they're doing it, but there's a big if. And so the big if is where I just struggle with this strategy of you do it on our terms, or else you can't do it. It's one thing to say, okay, we can't realistically, architecturally offer AI to on-prem, or we can't invest in AI for multiple platforms like cloud, public cloud, and on-prem. I get that. If that would make more sense to me. But now it's almost in some ways worse, because they're saying, yes, we're going to do it. We can do it. We are going to do it, but only if you commit to this cloud journey. And that's the rub. If they just would have left that last part out, I think they'd probably get people to migrate to the cloud eventually on their terms, and they'd be a lot happier about it. But instead, they insist on forcing it. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts. I mean, I do think it's a step in the right direction. I just wish they would just stop with the whole mandate thing. I think in my opinion, it's wearing thin. I just talked to too many customers, too many irate and disgruntled SAP customers that are still going to stick with SAP. That's the thing. They're not going anywhere. I mean, we don't see many SAP customers going to Oracle or Microsoft or anything like that. It's very rare. In fact, 10 years ago, it was pretty common. And nowadays, you just don't see a lot of SAP shops switching to become Oracle or Microsoft or Workday shops or whatever. But having said all that, I just think that they could soften their tone a bit. But it is a massive concession. It tells you the cloud migration pressure isn't working as well as SAP had hoped, even though they're still applying some pressure. They have backed off a bit. And there's been enough pushback from the user community. I know the DSAG, the ASUG, different user groups throughout the world, it's all having an effect. And so if you've been holding off on a forced migration, this gives you more leverage. And we're going to dig into this in upcoming episodes as well. So curious to hear what you think. What do you think of this? Not a U-turn. I don't know if U-turn is the right word, but it's a pivot. Why don't we call it that? Because that is essentially what's happening here with their decision to allow some AI adoption with on-prem customers, as long as they commit to the cloud journey. Curious to hear your thoughts on that. So I want to pull up a related audience question of the week. And this is from a recurring pushback in my comments and DMs. This is actually indicative of many comments I get. Now, I get a lot of mixed comments from people when I talk about vendor lock, when I quote unquote pick on SAP because they're the big 800-pound gorilla in the industry. They're probably the most aggressive at the forced migration approach. And, to be fair, they've got enough leverage with their customer base that they can. And this is what I talk about in my book, in Welcome to the Machine. When you get a company as big as SAP, or even Oracle, Microsoft, maybe to a slightly lesser degree, they all do it. It's not like SAP's alone here, but SAP just is the bigger behemoth, and they're more aggressive with their approach, maybe because they can. But the problem here is these companies are getting so big, and they're getting customers locked in so deeply, and the technology is becoming so intertwined with their customers' operations that the switching costs are just so high. It is such a pain to move from SAP to any other platform, or to move from Microsoft or Oracle to SAP, to be fair. I mean, anywhere you move, it's very difficult, especially for these big Fortune 500 multinational companies throughout the world. But I've been critical of it, and I'll always be, if I have a bias, it's always going to be that I'm biased towards customers, because let's be fair, let's call a spade. We make our money from our clients, so our job is to represent our clients' best interests. We don't make any money off vendors, so by definition, economically, we don't have a financial stake in ensuring that vendors are happy. But we do have to make sure our customers are happy. And one of the big things we hear from customers day after day, every day, literally, we hear from SAP customers, ERP customers that are frustrated with the way the vendors are handling this cloud migration and AI journey that we're on. But here's the question that I want to get to, because it gets to the elephant in the room, and this is a pushback on my view of this here. So I want to address it and open up a debate here. But the question is this: Eric, you keep saying SAP is squeezing customers, but they just announced AI for on-prem and 50 or over 50 Joule assistants. Aren't they actually delivering for customers now? Maybe the vendor villain narrative is outdated. So really interesting. First of all, I don't think SAP is a villain. I think SAP is acting in its own economic self-interest to generate profit, right? That's their job. So I don't fault them for that. Investors are rewarding the company very favorably. At least they had been up until the last few months. The stock price has dropped quite a bit, but overall, SAP stock price has been pretty high, and investors have rewarded SAP for cloud adoption, even though it's below expectations. They're increasing the annual recurring revenue. They're investing heavily in AI. They are creating a stronger stickiness with customers, which stickiness, some might say that's vendor lock. I'm not saying it's intentional. I'm not saying SAP does any of this intentionally. SAP is intentionally trying to sell software, so I don't fault them for that. But again, back to the theme of my book, Welcome to the Machine, this industry is broken. Just the systemic way that it's built is broken. And so it's no one person that has this draconian dystopian master plan to take over the tech industry and screw every enterprise customer out there. That is not what's happening. But what's happening is the industry is morphing into something that I think is taking away from customers, or taking leverage and power away from customers and putting it in the hands of tech vendors. Now, if you're a tech vendor, that's awesome. That's amazing. Your investors love it. Your executives are getting comp for it. Your sales reps are making more money for it. So everyone's happy, right? In that ecosystem. But the problem is, where does that leave the customer? So I agree that I don't view SAP, Microsoft, Oracle, any of these guys as villains at all. And so I just want to make that clear. But I do think that SAP softening a bit on their AI stance is a good sign. I think the fact that they've pushed out their forced migration, or their sunsetting of ECC support, they've pushed it out a couple times now. I imagine they'll probably push it again. Some will disagree with me strongly. Some in the SAP space will strongly disagree with that, but I don't see how they could possibly stick to that 2030 deadline. But that's a debate for a whole nother time. But I do think that they are softening. They're recognizing that the stick tactic isn't working. I'd like to see them use more of a carrot, like, let's build amazing products that everyone's excited to migrate to. We're just not quite seeing that yet. I think maybe they'll get there with this whole autonomous enterprise and Joule and all the stuff they're investing in now. Maybe that gets customers to where they need to be in terms of feeling that carrot, more of a carrot and less of a stick. So I do think, though, this comment brings up fair pushback, and I'll give credit where credit is due. The on-prem AI reversal is real. It's a real win for customers. SAP listened, and that's good. Sometimes I've been critical of SAP not listening to their customers. I think they are starting to listen, even with this. I want to talk about this API shift here in a second too, but let me hold on for a second there. But let's not mistake one concession for a strategic shift. Just because they backpedaled because of customer pushback and blowback, and it kind of blew up in their face a bit, even the user groups are pushing back on it. I don't know that it's a strategic pivot. I don't know that it changes the modus operandi of SAP, but for the time being, short-term win for customers, and hopefully that continues to some degree. But SAP still has the 2030 ECC deadline. They've still tightened the API policy a few weeks ago to restrict third-party AI access. And that's the thing I wanted to get to, because that, to me, is the big thing. And they still require you to commit to the cloud journey to get the on-prem AI. So the squeeze hasn't ended. They've just modified and morphed and backed off in cases where customers have pushed back. And so if you are an SAP customer, I highly encourage you to keep pushing back, because I think that's the only way things are going to change, is if customers push back and if regulators push back. That's the only two ways this will change. And in fact, in Europe is doing an investigation right now, or looking into anti-competitive behavior in the third-party support market, because of the way SAP has essentially blocked out and made it very difficult for third-party providers to provide third-party support. They're also getting sued by Celonis in the US because Celonis is saying that SAP has cut off Celonis's ability to access SAP to do business process mining. And so I look at those two things. The regulators are starting to get, more involved and starting to turn up the heat, not just regulators, but litigation as well. So through litigation and regulation, you're starting to see some movement there. I'm going to talk in a few minutes here about Microsoft too. Microsoft is facing some significant similar issues that I'll dive into as well. But in both these cases, I've submitted my own opinions to regulators on what I think about this and the dynamics of the industry. I based a lot of this, what I wrote to regulators is what I used to inform my new book, Welcome to the Machine, where I talk about dysfunctions in the industry. And so I think that's the lesson here is customers push back hard, regulators are stepping in, there's litigation happening. So the pressure's going both ways. SAP's putting pressure on customers. Now we just need more customers, regulators, perhaps litigation. And I'm not saying go sue SAP, to be clear, for all the legal types out there. I am not suggesting that everyone needs to go sue SAP, but I am saying that through regulation, litigation, and customer pushback, those are the only three things you're going to be able to do to change the behavior of SAP and other big tech vendors. So when customers organize and push back through user groups, social media, regulatory bodies, vendors are going to respond. So it's important to not just accept that this is how it works narrative. You can push back, it works. And more importantly, perhaps in the short term, is to define a strategy that navigates the realities of what you're up against. So you've got to make the right decision for your business. You can't defer too much or succumb to the challenges of what SAP might suggest. So that's my 2 cents. I'm sticking with it. I'd love to hear your feedback on that. Where do ERP stand in the trust spectrum, the trust continuum here? Do you trust them? Do you like the way they treat their customers? Are they delivering what they should be to their customers, or are they reverting to these tactics that these strong arm tactics that aren't effective? I'd love to hear your feedback, and maybe it varies by vendor too. So I'd love to hear your feedback there. But we're going to take a quick break, and we're going to come back here in a moment, and we're going to talk about this Microsoft investigation that's happening in the UK. It's with the Competition Markets Authority. They're looking into Microsoft's business software ecosystem. So again, the industry is broken, and that's the symptom that we're seeing here. These are the symptoms of it. So we're going to get to that here in just a moment. But we're also, in addition to that, we're also going to have Jason, who is the CEO of Basware. He's going to be on talking about lifecycle management, integrated or invoice lifecycle management for SAP and ERP implementations. Be sure to stick around. We've got a lot more to cover. You're listening to Transformation Ground Control. We'll be right back. Stick around.
I met her in a club down in Old Soho, where you drink champagne and it tastes like Coca-Cola. C-O-L-A.
If you only attend one event this year, make it Digital Stratosphere 2026. It's our annual flagship conference. It's going to be September 9th through 11th in Denver, Colorado, the same location as we held it last year. It's 3 days where digital leaders, ERP practitioners, and transformation experts come together for no-spin, vendor-neutral conversations on ERP, AI, and digital transformation. There's no marketing fluff. There's no pay-to-play sponsorships, just real practitioners sharing real lessons. Go to thirdstage-consulting.com/stratosphere to learn more and register. Tickets are limited, and these always sell out, and I'd love to see you there. Hello, welcome back to episode 274 of Transformation Ground Control. This is a tech agnostic podcast that covers everything related to digital transformation. We're going to have Jason from Basware on the show here in just a moment. We're going to have a great discussion interview with him talking about invoice lifecycle management within ERP implementations and SAP implementations. And more importantly, or just as importantly, I should say, we're going to talk about how it relates to clean core, best of breed, all the stuff that you're probably trying to navigate as it relates to your overall SAP and ERP strategy. But before we get to that, I want to talk a bit about this UK investigation into Microsoft. So the UK has a agency or a organization within the UK government called the Competition and Markets Authority, or the CMA. And they launched a formal strategic market status into Microsoft's business software ecosystem. So if you aren't familiar with CMA is part of the UK's new digital markets competition regime, which gives regulators broader powers to intervene in dominant tech ecosystems before competition is fully damaged. Now, I'm really torn on this because those that know me, if you've listened to me for a while, if you know me personally, you certainly know that I tend to lean a bit more libertarian in my political views and my view of where government fits in the world. I tend to think that the government should largely back off. I'm not a big fan of overreach and overregulation. That's my personal opinion. I don't want to make this political, but for me to say this, it's almost hard for me to say because I do think it's overdue. I think that there needs to be more guardrails in place because it's just so out of control. And you look at, it's really interesting because one thing I talk about in my book, Welcome to the Machine, I talk about industry dysfunction and the dynamics between software vendors, consultants, and customer buyers, and just the way the whole ecosystem is just dysfunctional. It just doesn't work very well. It works really well for vendors and consultants, but it just doesn't work well for customers. And I think it's getting worse. But when you look at this, it's just fascinating to me how if this were a consumer-facing industry, this would have been regulated decades ago. There's no way regulators throughout the world would have allowed this sort of behavior that we see in the industry. You would never see this in a consumer-facing industry. But because we're in the B2B industry, we're selling to other businesses, it's hard to feel bad for that big Fortune 500 company and their CEO that's getting paid millions of dollars. It's hard to feel bad for them. It's hard to come in and step in and say we should spend all these resources regulating so that big Fortune 500 company doesn't get hurt. But I think it's, first of all, more than just Fortune 500 companies getting hurt here. It's a lot of companies, a lot of mid-market companies, I think, are getting overlooked here. They're getting squeezed. Smaller companies, I think they're a little more nimble. They can move a little faster. They seem to be able to get around this, in a more nimble way. But mid-market and big companies, I think, are struggling a lot with this, largely because of not just their own dysfunction, and not just because of the dysfunction of vendors and consultants, but all three are dysfunctional. So I actually think this is long overdue. And I'm hoping that this initial regulatory investigation into Microsoft, SAP is facing something similar in the EU related to third-party support. I mentioned that earlier in this podcast. But I'm hoping this regulatory pressure actually starts to change things. I think that's the only way to soften this up to where customers can actually have more of a voice, more leverage in the relationship, more transparency, more realistic expectations. Now, of course, they need to be smarter too. They need to address their own cultural issues, their own political issues internally, their organizational dysfunctions, their decision-making issues. There's a lot of stuff that organizations do wrong to contribute. Don't get me wrong. I'm not blaming this all on vendors and consultants, but the vendors and consultants don't do themselves any favors, and they certainly don't do their customers any favors when they feed into that dysfunction to sell more software and to create more bias and to create unrealistic expectations and to create more profit with very little value to show for it for their customers. On one hand, the customers are enabling this behavior, but the consultants and vendors are certainly taking advantage of that. So let's get back to the CMA thing within the UK. So what they're suggesting here are the main allegations and concerns that the CMA is looking into. They're looking into whether Microsoft makes it difficult or expensive for customers to move workloads away from Azure. So they're kind of looking at this cloud piece of it here. In the past, Microsoft has been investigated for making it difficult to move away from Internet Explorer. And so this is back to my point about consumer facing versus business facing. Back, 20 years ago, 25 years ago, I think it was early 2000s, the EU launched an investigation into Microsoft and the way they bundled Internet Explorer with Windows and Windows machines and made it difficult for you to go with a Netscape, or I think Netscape was the big browser at the time, which I don't think exists anymore, but Netscape was one, and there's other competing browsers that didn't have, or they had a disadvantage, basically, is what the allegation was looking into. And eventually, from what I recall, Microsoft had to unbundle Internet Explorer, or at the very least make it very easy to switch from Internet Explorer to a competing browser. Now, the interesting thing about all this is, first of all, Internet Explorer is not super relevant nowadays as it once was. So at the end of the day, you wonder, well, does it matter because things change so quickly? But even less known is Netscape. So Netscape is something that didn't last. So even regulatory support or help wasn't able to help them. And Internet Explorer continued to thrive. And of course, now we're all talking about Safari and Chrome and other browsers. Now we're talking about AI. Eventually browsers might be dead as a category. But having said all that, Microsoft has a history with regulatory investigations or allegations, whatever you want to call it. And so they're also looking at, the CMA is also looking at their bundling. So it is kind of going back to a theme that the EU looked at decades ago. The CMA is scrutinizing whether Microsoft unfairly bundles Teams, Copilot, Office, Windows, Azure, all in a way that makes it difficult to switch. They're looking at their cloud licensing tactics. Allegedly, they charge customers more to run Windows servers and related workloads on competing clouds like AWS and Cloud and Google Cloud than if they were just using Azure itself. So critics argue that this artificially advantages Azure and hurts competitors. So this is really interesting because this is bigger than Microsoft. This isn't all, to me, this isn't really about Microsoft. It's a systemic dysfunction within the industry. And Microsoft happens to be a big player. They just happen to be the one, for whatever reason, that has a bullseye on their back or a target on their back in this particular investigation. So the investigation could become a blueprint, though, for how regulators globally address ERP vendor lock-in, AI platform dominance, cloud concentration, enterprise software bundling. This is especially relevant as AI becomes embedded into more core enterprise workflows. So I think this is much broader than Microsoft. I think it's just the start. Eventually, regulators will probably look into other vendors and just the overall market as a whole. So, why should you care as an enterprise customer? Well, it affects negotiating leverage that you do or don't have. It affects your future software costs. It affects your cloud strategy flexibility, whether or not you can embark on composable ERP strategies or best of breed strategies, how you use AI tools. All this stuff is going to be affected by how this all plays out. And so, again, this is all moving so fast, and companies are making huge multi-million-dollar decisions right now that are going to affect them for years and decades to come. But but they're doing it against this backdrop of sketchiness or questionable behavior, in my opinion, of the industry. So, depending on what happens, there's a lot that the CMA could do to remedy the situation. They could put restrictions on bundling. They could require interoperability. They could make it easier to switch. They could change licensing practices, limits on Azure pricing, requirements on third-party integrations, et cetera, et cetera. So I think these are all things that are yet to be determined by the CMA, and there's a lot that will come out of this that will come out as a result. Now, what I want to do here is I want to share with you a document this is a letter that I wrote just a few days ago and sent it to the CMA, and this is these are my comments on the whole thing. So what I want to do here is I'll highlight a few things from this letter. Now, here's one that I want to highlight right here, and this is the central thesis of my letter. It's about it's a 16-page letter that goes into some detail with what they're investigating and what my thoughts are, my observations, my opinions, et cetera. So my central thesis of the letter is that Microsoft's business software ecosystem delivers significant innovation and customer value, but its increasing ecosystem concentration, bundling practices, and integration dependencies may create structural barriers to customer choice, interoperability, competition, and long-term innovation within enterprise technology markets. That's the whole premise of this letter. And as you go through it, I'm not going to read it all to you. I want to just highlight a few things, though. One is that my concern is not innovation itself. Microsoft has contributed to productivity and capability of modern enterprises. I acknowledge Microsoft's investments in the UK. I focus a lot about the UK and UK industry because that's where this is all happening. We have an office in the UK. We have a team in the UK. So I want to call out that group, although this is something that I would apply or I could apply to any part of the world. I don't think this is at all unique to the UK, but this investigation is. So that's where I'm focused here. So, and one thing I make clear throughout this letter is I am not blaming Microsoft. I'm not saying Microsoft has the intent to do the things that are the outcome of what's happening, but it is something that regulators need to look at. So when you go down this, I highlight a few things. I focus on increasing dependence on a single vendor ecosystem. And I talk about the different ways that Microsoft bundles all these different products together. Now, this is what's strange is on one hand, I actually like Microsoft's strategy because they have so many different options and you can plug and play Power BI and You can use Azure and Power Platform, Power Apps. You can go create your own apps. You can use Copilot. So they've got all this cool stuff. It's very innovative. It's very cool stuff. I have no problems with Microsoft, even though I still, to this day, 30 years later, 30 years after graduating college, I still curse Bill Gates every time I have a formatting issue with Microsoft Word or Microsoft PowerPoint, because it's the same formatting issues I've dealt with for 30 years of using Microsoft products. But that's a whole nother podcast episode I'll get to some other time. But having said all that, despite my little formatting issues and problems, and for me blaming Bill Gates personally, despite all that, I do like what Microsoft does, but I think they've created a situation where customers are potentially being harmed. And I talk about how increased switching costs is raising prices longer term for customers, or it likely will. Reduces architectural flexibility and modularity, and creates organizational procurements and skills dependency on a single ecosystem. So, it's up to the regulators to decide, is that a big enough deal? How might that harm people? What's the economic impact, or whatever? I mean, that's not the scope of this letter. This letter is more to talk about where I see the challenges. When you look at this, you'll see that I also talk about bundling and commercial pressure. Anytime you bundle like that, you get customers more locked in. The customer loses pricing leverage. I talk about the interoperability and technical integration concerns. So, being able to integrate with other third parties, in my opinion, is something you should absolutely be able to do, especially when your data it's still your data, but now it's in the cloud, it's on someone else's infrastructure. I mean, just because it's on Azure or in someone's application, in the case of Microsoft, it's in their apps, it's still your data. You should be able to get it out and do whatever you want with it, put it wherever you want, integrate it wherever you want. But the vendors, not just Microsoft, they all do it. They're trying to limit that to some degree. And I think that's another area where customers are losing control. Now, where I want to talk is about how business software may evolve. This is one of the things they asked the respondents to comment on. So I talk here about the AI ecosystem concentration risks, and how there's a risk here with having too much concentration with AI and the other apps that go along with it. I also talk about the shift towards composable architecture and how that's where we're starting to see more organizations go. But at the same time, you're seeing pressures against that and I think vendors are responding to the composable ERP movement because they want a bigger share of wallet to get more people to invest in their software. And so they're going to push back on that movement by trying to make it more advantageous to customers, at least in the short term, to stay on their platform, to double down on their platform. And they might even offer concessions to get them to do that now. But the more they're successful now, the more that the vendors, are going to shift the playing field in their favor to where customers are going to find it harder and more difficult to switch later, to get their data out of the system later, to move to an entirely new platform, to try to integrate third-party systems. They just lose more leverage over time with the more concentrated that investment is and that risk is. And so I talk in here, what are the risks of vendor lock-in? And I talk about how you lose operational control because software vendors can change the software however they want, and you're going to accept it because now you're in the cloud. You may be on a multi-tenant cloud SaaS provider solution where literally you show up on a Monday morning and the system looks entirely different. You didn't know it was going to change. It doesn't meet your new business needs. That happens unilaterally. We have some customers that are using other products, not Microsoft, but SAP, and we've seen this with Oracle, maybe to a lesser degree, and other vendors too, where they decommission or discontinue certain modules within the software just because they decide, look, not enough customers are using this, or it's not working well within our overall suite, so we're just going to discontinue it. And now all of a sudden, customers left with a big gap in their operations, and they don't have a say in that. That now they have to go find a different system and go spend more money on something else because vendor chooses not to support it anymore. So that loss of operational control is a big deal. And I'd love to save this podcast, bookmark this podcast, watch it again in 5 or 10 years and see how relevant this statement is, because I don't think customers realize how much operational control they're giving up. Because right now we're at a moment in time where you can assess, yes, this fits, or no, it doesn't fit my business. If the answer is yes, that's great. You invest in that cloud system 10 years from now, doesn't mean it's going to fit. There's a high likelihood it's not going to fit anymore, not because it's a bad software, but because your business is going to change. You're going to evolve. You're going to acquire companies. You're going to change your business model. And that may or may not fit the software vendor. But what are you going to do? You have given up control. You can't just now go customize that software to do whatever you want like you used to. Now you've got to figure out, well, shoot, do I go buy a third-party system? Do I switch systems completely? Or do I just, worse yet, do I just deal with it and just accept the fact that the software is subpar for my needs and I'm just going to accept it? So loss of operational control, very big deal. I could write a whole book on that. Maybe I will. I don't know. Unilateral pricing exposure. We talked about that. Erosion of competitive differentiation. This is a big deal and something that I'm opining on another case involving another vendor. But one thing that gets overlooked in this industry is that companies, as they move to a standard suite of products, are diluting their competitive advantage. The more homogeneous ERP systems become, the more homogeneous for-profit organizations come, the more homogeneous for-profit organizations are, the less sustainable that is, because they have to do something different to be competitive. This is business 101. You don't become successful. You don't scale your business by being just like everyone else. You do it by being different. You do something better than anyone else. You don't do it by using something that's available to you off the shelf on a standard core ERP system. So that's the dark truth that no one wants to say out loud in this industry. So I'll say it for everyone. Systemic and concentration risk. Talk about that, having all your eggs in one basket, all your AI, all the apps, everything in one vendor. That's just, there's a higher risk concentration there. Switching costs are higher. The migration friction is higher. We talk about that in the letter. And then I talk about some potential issues and intervention. So the things that I would recommend that regulators look at, and that's something I talk about in this segment as well. And some of the things I talk about here include things like making sure there's interoperability standards, transparency requirements. This is a big one because I think the licensing structures, bundling economics, and discount mechanics all need to be looked at. You need to have data portability. So again, this is big because it is your data. Any limitation on a customer's use of their own data, I think, is absolutely a showstopper. I think that needs to stop. I think vendors need to stop acting like data is theirs, because it's not. Their source code is theirs. Their application is theirs. They're leasing that software to their customers via the cloud. But the data that's in there, that is absolutely the customer's data. And you should have absolutely no restrictions on that data, in my opinion. I don't know why vendors think they can. I know they hide under the guise of, security and compliance and all this garbage that is just BS. That's not up to the vendors to decide. That is up to the customers to decide. They're the ones that operate locally at whatever regulatory body they need to report to. Let the customers decide. We don't need vendors deciding that for us, in my opinion. Neutrality safeguards, commercial bundling safeguards. I cover a lot in this letter. I'm happy to share it with you. Just DM me if you want to see it. I also shared it on social media as well. I will share it on social media. So really interesting stuff, but I'm curious to hear your feedback. What do you think of this investigation with Microsoft, and how does it relate to the overall ERP space? I'd love to hear your feedback on that. So we're going to shift gears, though, here in a moment. And we are going to take a quick break. When we come back, I'm going to talk with Jason, who's the CEO of Basware. We'll talk about integrated lifecycle management, SAP implementation risk, ERP implementation risk, how to navigate the whole best of breed composable ERP strategies that are out there. Stick around. We've got a lot more to cover. You're listening to Transformation Ground Control.
I'm Greg Benton. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer with Third Stage Consulting. And if you are embarking on your digital transformation journey or in the middle of that journey in 2026, you're going to want to see our digital transformation report. This latest edition really dives into a lot of the key trends that we're seeing in the marketplace and the ecosystem right now. It also highlights a number of the things that are happening with AI being an important component and integral part of the ERP systems that are leading the way right now. Also, the shift toward composable and best-of-breed cloud solutions is really accelerating the decline of monolithic ERP replacement. The opportunity to download the report is found at thirdstage-consulting.com. And you'll also find other tools that will help you in the initiatives and the business planning that you're doing for 2026. Don't leave phase zero without it. Reach out today.
I want to encourage you to read our Guide to Organizational Change Management. It's a free report or a free guide that we published. It's one that I actually wrote that talks about best practices and lessons learned as it relates to change management. So as you know, on this podcast, we cover a lot of stuff related to the human sides of change, organizational change management, including training, communications, org design, all kinds of stuff as it relates to change management. So if you're trying to learn more about change management, or you're looking for more direction and ideas on how to get started on your change management strategy and your overall journey, be sure to check out this guide. You can read it by scanning the QR code on the screen in front of you, or in the links below for this particular podcast episode. You can find a link to take you to the page that will allow you to register to go ahead and download that and read it for free. So be sure to check it out. It's the Guide to Organizational Change Management, written by yours truly. I hope you enjoy it. Let me know what you think, and hope you enjoy the rest of this episode. Welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 264. My name is Eric Kimberling. You can find new episodes of this show every Wednesday at transformationgroundcontrol.com. And actually, this is not episode 264, it's episode 274. So time flies when you're having fun. I lost track of what number I'm on. So thanks for being here today, and I'm excited for our guest, first-time guest on the show, Jason Kurtz. He's the CEO of Basware, a company that does integrated lifecycle management for SAP and other products, Oracle, Microsoft. I think over 100 different systems that they integrate with to help extend and provide more robust invoice lifecycle management, which, as we'll talk about, may not be the sexiest thing you can talk about, but it is something that can deliver real business value in terms of efficiency gains, regulatory compliance, and also protect against fraud and leakage in your procurement processes. So I'll let him explain it, what he does in his company, because he can do it a lot better than I can. So all that being said, Jason, thanks for being here today.
Thrilled to be here. Thank you for having me.
First time you and I have had a chance to sit down live in a podcast format. We've spoken before, but never in this live podcast format. So some of the listeners here that are longtime regular listeners may not know who you are, may not know who Basware is. So tell us a little bit about you and about Basware, if you don't mind, to get us started.
Sure. And by the way, I didn't put it in the chat, but I'm coming to you live from Atlanta, Georgia, which is home for me. So it's nice to be on the road and home. And again, thanks for having me. So just by way of introduction, obviously the CEO of Basware. I've been with the company about 3.5 years now. Prior to that, I've spent about 25 years broadly in the source to pay space, and previously had worked with companies like Jagger and Ariba. And I spent 11 years at Ariba, and I actually ran the part of the business that competed directly with Basware at that point in time. And I had a lot of respect and admiration for the company and the products. And as we say, if you can't beat them, you join them. And so that's kind of how I've ended up here. Basware, for those who don't know, and appreciate the opportunity to give a little bit of an intro. We are the worldwide leader in invoice lifecycle management. So end-to-end management of invoices, everything from invoice ingestion to matching and reconciliation to exception handling, routing for approvals, protection from fraud and duplicate and overpayments, supplier statement matching and reconciliation, all the way over to passing an OK to pay to your ERP, whether that be SAP or Oracle or whatever it might be. So
I want to stop for just a second there, because Jason used a phrase that you're going to hear a lot today in this conversation, and that's invoice lifecycle management. So I want to translate that into plain English because it sounds boring and bureaucratic, but it's actually one of the highest stakes processes in your business. And here's what invoice lifecycle management actually means. It means that every dollar that goes out the door from your company is or should be tied to an invoice. That invoice has to be received and read. So you're going to get it from email, paper, EDI, vendor portals. You occasionally run across companies that are still getting faxes, which is unbelievable, but it does happen. But you're getting these invoices through various sources, and then you've got to match the invoices to the purchase order and ensure that you actually received the products. And that's what's often called three-way match. So you would have purchase order, goods receipt, and then payment. You don't do the payment until you know you've got the invoice and the goods or services received. You're sure that it was approved by the right people in the right order. You check for fraud, which could include duplicates, fakes, suspicious patterns, and you want to make sure you're compliant with whatever country you're operating in. Or in the case of the United States and other parts, you also might have more local requirements as well. You also want to make sure that invoices are paid on time, the right amount to the right account, and then you want to record it in your ERP system to make sure that the books are accurate. Now, this sounds simple enough, right? But you multiply that by the millions of invoices that your company processes a year in dozens of different countries and dozens of different currencies. with dozens of different compliance regimes. Each one is different. Each one is changing every year. So you can see how this quickly becomes a big deal. If you get this wrong, you could lose millions through fraud, duplicate payments, compliance fines, lost productivity. You damage your supplier relationships because you're not paying them on time. So now you're getting your raw material slow because they're holding out shipments because you haven't paid them. That affects your entire supply chain, your customers, your revenue and cash flow. Lots of domino effects here. So you get it right and it's invisible. The money flows out the door cleanly and your business runs. And that's what makes invoice lifecycle management potentially so boring. It should be boring, but for most organizations, it's not boring. It leads to issues, leakage, fraud, all that sort of thing. And I think the fraud thing is a big deal because especially now with AI and phishing scams and things of that nature, it's easy to, it's relatively easy for nefarious actors to submit, fraudulent invoices and somehow get payment out of a less sophisticated or robust procurement or accounts payable department. So companies that get it right can have a real advantage, and that's why this is so important.
Been very fortunate. We essentially created the industry nearly 41 years ago. We are headquartered in Helsinki, Finland, as you could probably tell from my accent. In our lifetime, we've processed over 2.5 billion invoices and just over 10 trillion euros in invoice spent. So really proud of all those accomplishments.
Yeah, that's great. So I didn't realize the whole if you can't beat them, join them aspect of your background. I didn't realize I didn't make that connection before when you and I spoke. So that's really interesting.
Yeah.
I'm curious. I've got to be honest. When you and I first talked about this podcast and this topic, my knee-jerk reaction was invoice lifecycle management. I mean, we're out here talking about AI. We're talking about advanced analytics and all this really cool, sexy stuff. And then you come to me and say, hey, why don't we talk about invoice lifecycle management? My first thought was, okay, I mean, is anyone really going to care about this topic? Why is it important? But then as you and I spoke, I was like, okay, this is actually a pretty big deal. For those naysayers in the room that think this isn't cool, this isn't sexy, this isn't, all the cool AI stuff we're used to talking about or whatever. Why is ILM or invoice lifecycle management? Why is that so important to an organization's overall effectiveness?
Yeah, I mean, at the fundamental core, the invoice is possibly the most exciting and sexy document there is on the planet, right? It is the connection between your company and all of the things you have bought and contracted for with your suppliers and vendors, which help you to make your products, goods, and services. It has unbelievable amounts of data in terms of your spend. What did you buy from who, for how much? Central to your compliance, both commercial compliance with the agreements that you're doing with your vendors, but also fiscal compliance and being able to operate in countries all over the world. So I would say, if there's any document that is sexy, it is definitely the invoice.
Well, and it's such a critical part of operations. And as you and I were talking about that, I know you're being somewhat facetious, but as you and I spoke about this, I realized that it got me thinking about how sometimes in digital transformations we lose sight of the fundamentals, like being able to manage invoices and pay your suppliers. I mean, that's such a basic thing, and we're over here talking about things light years in advance when we haven't taken care of the basic fundamentals of being able to handle invoice lifecycle management. And so I think sometimes it's important to come back to the fundamentals of things that companies struggle with, and you need to figure out before you can get to all the other cool stuff that everyone's all excited about, like AI or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, it is an invoice in all seriousness, and obviously we were having a little fun there, but it is an important document, right? It is the thing that connects what we bought from our suppliers to what we're going to be spending, the costs in our business. It is a requirement for operating in various countries to have invoices structured in a certain way. So, if you want to go do business in France, as an example, as of September of this year, if you don't structure and send and receive invoices in the right way, you can't do business there, right? Or you'll be fined. And so it is really, as you say, in some ways it is plumbing and some real back to the basic stuff, but it is something that is incredibly important. And people have been working on trying to improve and automate this document and this process for decades. And I think, it's kind of the holy grail of getting there. And we talk about at Basware being on this journey of taking our customers from wherever they are today to 100% automated, 100% protected from fraud, and 100% compliant in all the countries they operate, so that they have complete control of every invoice, every time, everywhere. And you would think that's not so hard, but companies have been trying to do this for 40 plus years. And they're still working on it. We're happy to see some of the most successful and best performing companies in the world choosing us to help them on this problem.
Yeah. No, that's great. And it's well said too. I think you framed the topic at hand here and the importance of this topic at hand really, really well. Want to go to the audience now. We're starting to get some comments back from people in terms of where they're joining from. Hello to Sanjay on LinkedIn. Thanks for joining here today. Dirk joining from SAP Sapphire in Madrid, which is very timely. So thanks for joining, Dirk, from Sapphire.
I was at the one in Orlando last week. So yes, I couldn't make it to Madrid. I had to do this with you.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you. I'm flattered that you chose to join this podcast instead of and I'm flattered that Dirk chose to step out of Sapphire, although it's probably
exactly. Thank you, Dirk.
Tell your friends, tell your colleagues to join the podcast because it's very relevant to that audience for sure. So here's a question, an early question here from Sanjay, and then I'll get into a couple of the ones I had for you too. But Sanjay asked on LinkedIn, which SAP platform is best suited for Invoice Lifecycle requirements? SAP S/4HANA, ECC, or cloud-based solutions, performance considerations, or cloud-based solutions and performance considerations exist for high-volume invoice processing. So which of the SAP solutions would you say is best for invoice lifecycle management?
Well, the good news is Invoice Lifecycle Management spans all versions of the platform. So if you look at today, just at Basware as an example, we have over 600 SAP ERP customers on different formats, generally ECC or the new cloud versions. Over 100 of them are already live on the cloud and literally growing every single day as more and more customers make that migration. So the answer is all. And in fact, that's where we sit, particularly well, where there's a complex environment, whether that's multiple instances of SAP, multiple instances of ECC plus cloud, or multiple ERPs. So a lot of our customers have ECC, maybe cloud. They might have an Oracle based on an acquisition or Dynamics or something like that. That is where we shine. The more and then I would also add, I think the other part of the question was, so the more volume in more countries with more different currencies, that's where Basware and Invoice Lifecycle Management is really at its best. And you look at our customer base, whether that's all over the world, whether that's Cummins or someone like that in the US, or NG or Danone or Heineken, like those are all large global complex enterprises that fit us, and that's where we really shine.
Gotcha. Yeah. Makes total sense. And by the way, for those watching the video version of this, if you want to learn more about Basware, click this QR code right here. It'll take you to a page that describes the company in a little bit more detail, give you some additional backdrop and context as we're getting into the conversation here. So be sure to check out that QR code here while we're talking. So I want to get into a topic here around your years at Ariba before SAP acquired it. And so what was fundamentally different? You've been doing this. Let me back up for a second. You've been doing this for decades now. You're not new to this space. You were at Ariba, as mentioned, yep. And now SAP after the acquisition, or then to SAP, and then now obviously with Basware. So what's fundamentally different about AP and invoicing today versus say 5 years ago or more?
Yeah, I think there are a few things. So one, which we got in a question about the transformations, right? Everybody is moving typically from an on-prem to a cloud, and that has ramifications on AP. So that's certainly one. Two, and I briefly mentioned it, is these invoice compliance mandates that are happening around the world. So whether that's France, Poland, Germany, Belgium, continuing evolution of that in Mexico, Brazil, et cetera. There's never been a point in time where so many invoice mandates are coming live or being updated or changed, and that has dramatic impacts on AP. The third, is certainly AI, right? There are capabilities in AI that are driving the value to AP teams like never before, and so taking advantage of that is definitely capability. So I would say those are probably the big three of the changes that we're seeing that are really having a big impact and making now the time to really invest and take a hard look at your invoice lifecycle management or AP capabilities that you might have today.
Gotcha. Yeah, makes total sense. Here's a question from Megan on LinkedIn. Megan says, what do you find to be the biggest issue when companies switch to a new system or move to the cloud? And whether it's related to ILM or just in general, it's up to you how you want to answer that. But I'm just curious what some of the biggest challenges are that you've seen.
Yeah, when I talk to our customers and when I speak to folks, whether they're the CFO or CIO or head of digital transformation, probably the biggest challenge or issue is ROI, right? Like, what's the value that we are going to get from going through this transformation to a new system or to the cloud? That's a big one. And I think companies have really struggled with answering that question. Now, the great news is, AP and invoice lifecycle management have kind of been demonstrably proven to deliver real hard dollar savings and ROI. So I think our customers would tell you start there. And as part of your journey on ILM in that journey to the cloud. But I think that's one that would be number one would be that ROI question.
So I want to insert a quick myth bust in the conversation here, and that is that we don't need ROI for cloud migration. Modernization is the ROI. That's something we hear a lot from our clients. Is like, why bother trying to quantify the ROI in the business case? Because we don't need to. We're going to do this either way. So what's the point of taking the time to do that? Well, I hear this all the time, and CIOs justify multi-million-dollar cloud migrations by saying things like we need to get off our legacy system, or we have to eliminate technical debt, or modernization is non-negotiable. But these aren't ROI statements; they're excuses. They're reasons, but they're not justification through business value and return on investment. Now, here's the truth, and here's a way to think about it. Every other capital investment in your business requires a business case, probably. I'm guessing. New factory. Are you going to build a new factory without an ROI? Are you going to enter a new product line without an ROI? Are you going to acquire another company without an ROI analysis? Probably not. But somehow when it comes to a $20 million cloud migration or whatever it is, we just skip that step because the vendor said we had to, because everyone else is doing it. We've got FOMO, the deadline's coming. We've got to get off the legacy system. And that's a big, big multi-million-dollar mistake. And Jason just nailed why. Companies want ROI. Their boards are asking for it. They're demanding it. The CFOs are asking for it. They just can't find it because they didn't build the business case at the start. And so here's what I tell every client. If your cloud migration doesn't have a real ROI story by the end of phase 0, stop and rebuild the business case. Don't keep going. The migration will pay for itself if you know what you're optimizing. If you're optimizing automation, fraud protection, compliance, working capital, AP efficiency, those are real dollars, but you have to look for them, and most companies don't. And not only is it a matter of realizing business value, it's also a matter of providing your implementation and your transformation team with some parameters and some principles that you're striving towards. Because if you don't have a business case and an ROI analysis, you're not going to know how to make decisions around customization and pivots on your scope, adding additional modules, maybe investing in bolt-ons or customization, whatever it is. You're not going to be able to make those decisions clearly without having an ROI. So you need to have an ROI. It's going to help not only deliver business value longer term, but it's going to help your implementation. It's going to help you stay on track and help you stay focused. So you just want to make sure that you do focus on that ROI component, which is so important. Now, we've got a lot more to cover. We're here with Jason from Basware talking about invoice lifecycle management. We're talking about ERP risk, we're talking about a lot of different things. We've got a lot more to cover. We're going to dive deeper into this here in just a moment. We'll be right back with more Transformation Ground Control.
When the soul of the city was laid to rest, and the night's forgotten.
If you're about to embark on the jungle of digital transformation, check out my new book, Welcome to the Jungle. It's a book that just came out in late 2025. It's my second book, and it's a book that focuses on digital transformation failure case studies and talks about the lessons and takeaways from that. It's 300 pages packed of all the lessons and things that I've learned from having been an expert witness in lawsuits related to digital transformations, and also with our team helping clients recover some of their failed projects. I've included as many lessons as I could possibly fit into one book here. You can read this book. You can order it anywhere in the world in hard copy format, which is this format here. You can get it in paperback. You can also get it electronically as well. Scan the QR code right here or go to the links below for your copy. Hope you enjoy it. Let me know what you think.
Are you looking for ways to promote your product or service to enterprise technology decision makers and influencers throughout the world, like the ones who listen to this podcast? Major Tom Productions creates media, events, and influencer marketing for B2B technology providers. Our productions are exciting, educational, disruptive, and effective. Most importantly, they create results. Our content is unlike any other in this industry, engaging, influential, and trusted by technology buyers and influencers throughout the world. Each month, our productions reach hundreds of thousands of targeted buyers and decision makers who trust and engage with our honest and tech-agnostic content. With long-tail viral results and engagement with our content, Major Tom Productions provides a way to reach your target market and create awareness, calls to action, and a connection with potential customers. So, collaborate with us today. Learn how we can feature your product or service on podcasts such as Transformation Ground Control, Journey to S/4HANA, and Journey to Dynamics 365. We can also feature your brand on our YouTube channel called Digital Transformation with Eric Kimberling, which boasts over 100,000 subscribers and over 2 million video views per year. You can also participate in our in-person events, including our Digital Stratosphere Conference. Contact us today to learn more. We can tailor a marketing campaign that works for you. We look forward to helping more people learn more about and become engaged with your brand.
Born of a battle from heaven's hand, and now you know. And here I
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 274. My name is Eric Kimberling. This is the Tech Agnostic Podcast that covers everything related to digital transformation. And if you haven't already, be sure to check out my new book. It's called Welcome to the Machine. It covers all things related to the tech industry and how you can navigate digital transformations in that context. I'll include a QR code here on the screen. Be sure to check it out. You can find it on Amazon. It ships anywhere in the world. It's also newly available on Audible too. So if you like the audio version of the book, you can find that and download that, listen to it at Audible on the Amazon website as well. So we're here with Jason from Basware talking about integrated lifecycle management. It's interesting. I don't know if you've seen this too, but it seems like a lot of companies in their mad rush to the cloud, like you described, or those are my words. Obviously, you didn't say mad rush, but I added that little dramatization of it. But in this dash, in this rush to the cloud, a lot of times organizations forget about such a basic thing like ROI. They think, well, I've got to go to the cloud. I don't why think about an ROI, why think about a business case. I just need to modernize. I need to get rid of technical debt. That is my business case. Do you think we'll have to go beyond that and say, well, no, let's look at some real metrics, some tangible value that we can get out of this implementation?
I know as the CEO of a company, my board expects that. So and I can't imagine, our customers wouldn't feel the same way, or most companies wouldn't feel the same way. So yeah, 100%. Like anytime we take on an investment like that, I think companies are looking for ROI. They're just having trouble finding it. I know I've literally sat in meetings with, our customers, and they said, okay, we're going to go spend X millions or tens or more millions of dollars or euros on this cloud transformation, and I don't know where the ROI is. Can you provide us some of this ROI that will help us fund this? And we say, yep, we got you, right? We're not going to pay for the whole thing, but we will help you on that journey, and we can deliver real hard dollar savings. And I think that's really exciting. And that's why so many companies are really taking a hard look at their AP automation capabilities and their as part of their broader invoice lifecycle management, because there is savings that help fund that transformation.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's some other challenges that go, and I kind of honed in on one because I think ROI is so fundamental to the challenge that a lot of companies are having in terms of finding and justifying it. But two, these compliance may be a real challenge for companies as well as they're thinking about it, because the way we typically roll out software, whether it be, any new system, whether it be in the cloud or not, but, certainly mostly in the cloud now, is we tend to think about it as business units or geographical areas where we run our businesses. But these compliance mandates that are happening all around the world, they don't really care about our rollout plans. They don't really care about our business unit structures. They have set a date, they are going to happen, and you're going to be paying fines if you don't comply with those. And I think often it's IT teams and or functions that really don't understand those mandates who are making the plans around those rollouts of new systems and cloud transformations. And so these mandates are missed, and then you have to go back and scramble to be able to accommodate them and satisfy those local requirements. So I think that's another big one that can be a real challenge and a real force.
Right. Yeah, that's a great point. And you bring up another question. I apologize, just for the audience's edification. Whenever I have a guest on the show, I send a handful of questions that I say I'm going to ask, and then inevitably by question 3 or 4, I go completely off script and start asking random things that have nothing to do with what I told the guest I was going to ask him. So I'm going to do that here for a moment, if you don't mind, because I think what you're touching on is really important around two themes here that kind of come together, and that is that in one hand you have this whole fit to standard clean core movement in the SAP community, where it's like, hey, let's get rid of technical debt, customization, move to clean core, make things simple, which is great, but there's limitations to the software. There's only, there's business value you might be leaving on the table because of gaps in functionality or things that could be done better. And then in parallel with that, I kind of want to fold this into one question, if I can. In parallel with that, you also have this movement or this concern around vendor lock. Like, how do I diversify outside of one product suite? So how does Basware fit into that whole thing, as far as either extending the capability of SAP and or mitigating vendor lock? Is it something that SAP fights and resists? Or just tell me how you guys play with SAP as a company and as a product, if you don't mind.
Yeah. So maybe I'll start there. We complement SAP, right? And we are a partner of SAP. We are BTP and Clean Core certified. And this all started because of that fact that I said earlier, which is we have over 600 SAP ERP customers who use us for invoice lifecycle management. And so, as they were starting their cloud journeys or thinking about it or moving along that journey, they said, hey, Basware, it'd be great if you had a more formal partnership with SAP, that you were closer, that you're, even more tightly integrated, from a product perspective. And so we said, hey, yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And SAP has been wonderful to embrace us and welcome us into this partnership. So I think a couple thoughts. So one, we're 100% part of the Clean Core strategy. In fact, what our customers tell us is they often want to, AP can be complex because of all of these countries that are being operated in, all the currencies, all the different business units, the multiple ERP or multiple instances of ERP. And if you try and put all of that complexity in SAP, that's the exact opposite of Clean Core, right? And so we have customer example that, a large German manufacturing company that said, hey, if we were going to do what Basware does and just try and do it in SAP alone, we would have had, we did a study, would have had over 3,000 customizations. With Basware, we essentially have 0, right? So, and that's just in AP.
So Jason just delivered a contrarian truth that contradicts how most people interpret Clean Core. Now, most CIOs think that Clean Core means doing everything in SAP. And system integrators and SAP might even suggest to you that that is part of what Clean Core is, or they might heavily insinuate that to be Clean Core, you need to stick with the SAP ecosystem or stick with the SAP direct product suite. But Jason just blew that up. He blew up that idea. Clean Core actually means using best of breed partners to keep SAP clean. I think this is really important because this is something I don't talk a lot about on this podcast. I probably don't talk enough about it. I don't talk enough about it in my videos and industry presentations, all that stuff. But to keep the core clean, you need to find the solutions that you need to bolt on to SAP, because SAP, just like any other system out there, is imperfect. It's incomplete. It is not going to be 100% fit with what you need. So rather than trying to customize the software, or worse yet, rather than trying to just deal with however SAP was built, for better or for worse, why not consider ways that you could find best of breed partners to keep the clean core? So I think that's something that's really important, like, because a lot of CIOs think that you want to consolidate everything into SAP, minimize customizations, eliminate third-party tools, and that's wrong. That interpretation actually leads to more customization, not less, because SAP can't natively handle every nuance of every business in every country. So Jason just gave you the proof. The German manufacturer that would have needed 3,000 customizations in SAP to handle their AP process globally. That's a lot. That's 3,000 customizations. And so the company saved 3,000 customizations and 3,000 potential breaks of the S4HANA product. And now with Basware sitting alongside SAP, they don't have those customizations. And so the SAP core is genuinely cleaner now because they're not forcing it to do something that it wasn't built to do. So real clean core works when SAP does what it does best, which is core transactions, financial system of record. Specialized partners handle the specialized stuff like invoice processing, e-invoicing, AI, fraud detection, treasury tax, whatever it might be. And the result you get from that is a clean core, total cost of ownership that's lower, faster upgrades, easier compliance, and best-in-class capability for the parts that matter. Now, the opposite is true. This is the opposite, I should say, of vendor lock-in. This is a strategic partnership architecture. So it relies on SAP as the core, but it's also relying on third parties outside of SAP. And it's how every well-run global SAP shop is actually operating today. They don't just talk about it because the vendor-led all-in-one narrative still dominating the marketing. And you don't want to fall for that marketing. Clean core is real, but it's not, or it may not be exactly what you think.
So delivering on that clean core message, I think, is a part of who we are and what we do. I think it's a real benefit to ARC because, one, it de-risks their SAP cloud transformation journey. It keeps the core clean, which allows for future innovation faster, lower total cost of ownership. There's real benefits there. And it helps comply with all these mandates going around the world. So that's been a real plus. In fact, we have numerous customers who have said, we're going to go on this journey to the cloud with SAP or Oracle or whoever, but we actually want to get our AP house in order first, and we're going to do it with you, Basware, so that when we get to our SAP cloud implementation and transformation, it's actually easier for us, right? There's less work, it's less expensive, and we can just plug that in as we roll out business unit by business unit or geography by geography. So that's been a big part of it. And I think to the second part of your question, which is around vendor lock, I think we de-risk that vendor lock, right? Because, like many other, I was at Sapphire last week, even SAP acknowledged, right? I think on average, their customers have, over 200 different software packages that exist and are integrated into their SAP landscape to diversify value where there's specific points of value. We are one of the common ones of that. And so that's a strategy that a lot of our customers have. And I think there are areas where kind of that best of breed that complements ERP, complements SAP is really important. And because we do as invoice lifecycle management, we have to be the best at it. We have to have the best technology. We have to have the most advanced AI. We have to deliver the best value. That's our value proposition to our customers. And I think that because there's so much ROI associated with what we do, and that's why the complementary nature is so good and so strong there. Does that make sense?
It totally does. And I think it's a good takeaway, a good reminder for SAP customers and really any ERP customer out there is, I think a lot of times there's like this binary decision-making thought process that goes into it. Like either I'm going to be clean core or I'm not. Either I'm going to go all in on SAP or I'm not. And I think what you're saying is you can go and have that clean core, but it's not all or nothing. I mean, you can add something like a Basware to.
You're actually probably going to have you're probably going to have a cleaner core by using Basware and maybe some others than you would without it, right? So you're actually better off choosing a partner like us to help in that situation because you will get a cleaner core, you will have a lower total cost of ownership, you will have a faster path to innovation and future upgrades and things like that. So your actual clean core strategy is better served by using people like Basware.
Yeah, really good point. And I think that's why, when we're advising SAP customers or any ERP provider customers, one thing we always do is to say, okay, even if you've already selected the software, you're going to go the path of S4HANA, let's say, we always advise, like, go ahead and poke holes in it. Go ahead and find the gaps, not because you want to create uncertainty or you want to second guess the decision, but because you need to identify where these gaps are, to where the clean core is at risk if we don't do something to extend the clean core or add to it. And I think this is a good example of how you might do that in invoice lifecycle management.
Yeah, and look, it's easy for me to say, right? You should go check out Basware and take a look at it. But I would tell you, go look at Gartner, go look at Forrester, go look at IDC. We are the most recognized year after year company in invoice lifecycle management. And in fact, if for those who are Gartner peer reviews, go take a look at the Gartner peer reviews. We have 4 times as many Gartner peer reviews as any other company in our space, because of this complementary nature and the leadership and innovation that we drive. And so, we let our customers do the talking on that. And so if you're a Gartner, Forrester, IDC, go take a look. I think you'd be very pleasantly surprised. And then Hackett just named us the leader once again in our space as well. So hopefully it's not just me saying it or you saying it. It's our customers who are saying it as well, which is great.
Yeah, the most important stakeholder there, for sure. Okay, Mrs. NJ, thanks for joining on TikTok. I appreciate you being there. Ms. Medell Happen. I am Time Machine, joining from Vietnam. Thanks for being here today. So we've got a lot of people joining here on TikTok as well. So Jason was saying, right, as we were going live here, that he has never been on TikTok or on a podcast on TikTok before. So Jason Kurtz, ladies and gentlemen, he will soon be a star on TikTok. So thanks for watching here. Sasha, hello, Sasha.
Hello, TikTok world. I'm thrilled to be here. Yes.
Yes. He's soon enough, you'll see Jason in dancing videos with cats and other fun memes, I'm sure, right? Be right on that.
We'll invent the Basware dance, something like that. Yes.
Yeah.
The invoice lifecycle.
Something about invoicing. Yeah. You could probably do something to make that fun, because invoicing is such an important fundamental thing for organizations. And a lot of times it's a pain too. So you could, because it's such a pain for a lot of organizations, you can have a lot of fun with that for sure. Here's a question from Srikon on YouTube. Says, what are the bigger risks companies usually face in SAP invoice lifecycle management, and how can they reduce them effectively?
Yep. So I would say, that ROI, making sure we're getting ROI. That's one. The clients piece, I think, is a big one, right? So, many SAP customers operate in, tens, if not hundreds, over 100 companies or countries around the world, and staying aware and abreast and compliant with mandates that are going on and they're still coming down the pipe. I think that's one. Fraud is another one, right? So often, particularly around invoicing, right? AI is great for us as companies, but unfortunately AI is great for actors out there who are also using AI to commit, to send fraudulent invoices, try and get fraudulent payments, and solutions like Basware use AI to defend you and guard against that, to protect you. But that's definitely a risk, particularly for companies going through a transformation and migration from ECC to the cloud. We've heard a lot from our customers that that's where they are most at risk to fraud, is because you're kind of in the middle or transition of systems. You might have some still in on-prem, some in the cloud, and fraudsters are really able to take advantage of that situation. We talked about the clean core and making sure you stay clean so that you have a lower total cost of ownership, better access to innovation in the future, and then AI, right? So just what I think folks would say is that these cloud transformation on the ERP side can take a long time, and AI in terms of innovation and pace of innovation, that wait till after you've gone through a transformation, or it's taking you months, if not years, to do that, you're falling behind what your competitors are doing. And so I think it's the risk of competitiveness if you don't take advantage of some of these other capabilities of solutions like Basware to complement and accelerate what you're doing from an ERP information perspective.
Now, I want to pause on what Jason just said, because most of you probably missed how big this is. And that is that e-invoicing compliance mandates are a global wave. And most companies are sleepwalking through this. And they're missing the bigger point here. Here's what's happening. Governments around the world are mandating that B2B invoices be exchanged electronically in specific structured formats, often routed through government clearance platforms. So France is going live with their platform in September. Germany is mid-rollout. Belgium, Poland, Mexico, Brazil, all are in motion or just changed their rules. Italy already requires it, and the list is just going to continue to grow over time. And if you get this wrong, if you don't follow the government rules for invoicing B2B scenarios, you're going to get fined. Sometimes it's per invoice, which can add up very quickly. In some cases, you literally can't do business. Jason mentioned that in France, starting in September, if your invoices aren't compliant, you can't, or if your invoices aren't in compliance, you can't sell into France at all. Your growth is blocked. So Basware's own research shows that 50% of U.S. headquartered companies have missed expansion opportunities into new countries because they couldn't comply fast enough. And the kicker is that the rules change every year. France just tweaked theirs for September. Mexico updates theirs annually. Brazil is revamping. So this isn't just a one and done compliance project. It's ongoing operational discipline. Now, Jason mentioned that SAP covers about 40 countries natively. And if you operate more than that, most multinationals do, you need a partner. You need a solution that bolts onto SAP to address this. Or if you don't, you're going to need a team of 30 people or whatever in your tax department who do nothing but monitor mandates. And that's not fun for anyone. But the bottom line is this: if you operate globally and your CIO and CFO aren't talking to your tax team about e-invoicing compliance right now, you have a problem. So you want to get them in a room this week, listen to this podcast, listen to what Jason has to say, listen to the conversation. You need to do it now. What should multinational SAP customers be doing right now to avoid getting flat-footed or fined in that regard?
Yeah. So one, I think, I would recommend whoever's running your SAP or solution, make sure you're talking with your tax, finance, procurement folks, because they're more likely to be the ones who really understand what those invoice mandates are and that are coming. So make sure they have a seat at the table to have a conversation. So that's one. I would tell you, make sure those folks are at the table. Two, I think you need to understand that SAP, and I was just at Sapphire, so I heard them talking about what their plans are around country compliance, and they're going to do a set of countries. It's probably going to be around 40. But if you operate in more than 40 countries, many of our customers do, and I'm sure your listeners and viewers do as well, you're kind of going to have to find another solution or do it yourself. And that's really challenging. Just as an example, we have 30 people at our company, nothing but monitor all the invoice mandates, when they're coming, what changes are, what the rules are going to be, how do we translate that into our product so that our customers, we say we make it all just happen for our customers so they don't have to worry about it. They're not in that business of monitoring country compliance. That's what we do and ensure compliance. So I'd say that's a big part of it is think about your strategy. The biggest mistake today is they see France mandate coming, or Germany or Belgium or whatever one it is, and they see it as a cost, right? And they're like, okay, now we got to go configure our system and it's going to take a while, but we're going to wait till the last possible minute to do. And that's a real mistake, because what ends up happening is you end up with country by country compliant solutions versus having a total company-wide view of how we're going to manage compliance. You tend to have a cost versus really understanding the benefits of being compliant. As an example, we just did a study with FT Longitude in the US of US headquartered companies, and over 50% have missed out, or right around 50% have missed out on opportunities to grow and expand their business in new countries because they didn't either understand the mandates or they were late to comply with the mandate and therefore couldn't do business in those countries. So it's impacting growth. And then on the other hand, US companies are 5 times more likely to pay compliance fines than European companies, as an example, because they're not as attuned to the various laws. In Europe, you typically operate across many, many countries. In the US, you can grow up just being in the US and not really be aware of everything going on in LATAM and Asia and Europe. And so I think European headquartered companies tend to be much more attuned to that. So I would say find a partner like Basware who can help you, guide you through this and make it happen, but have the right people at the seat of the table so that your rollout plans reflect the reality of all these mandates that your company is going to have to comply with, so you don't get fined and so you don't miss out on growth opportunities in those countries.
So do you ever have customers along those lines that say, well, okay, that sounds great, Jason, but SAP is SAP. I mean, it's built for multinationals. Of course, it's going to be compliant. Of course, it's going to give me everything I need to avoid those regulatory fines. Is that, what do you say to that?
I say SAP is solid for the 40 countries it covers, right? If you're going to do it in other places, you're going to have to figure out how to do it yourself, or you're going to need a partner like Basware who can help you cover the rest of the world.
Plus,
so that's where I was just going to say, that's where we complement, right? Because SAP does a great job in those 40. But if you operate in more than those, you're going to need help. And that's where SAP turns to partners like us to help their customers be compliant. So they would say, go find a partner who does it, who's BTP certified and Clean Core certified, because that's a better solution than trying to figure it out yourself and then choosing a non-compliant, non-Clean Core, non-BTP certified solution.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm sure you've seen this too, but we've seen so many clients, not even just within Invoice Lifecycle Management, but just across the board, whether it's financials or reporting, whatever it is. Yes, SAP can do, even in cases where SAP does and can handle compliance and regulatory type stuff, it's easy to break that. It's during the implementation, it's easy to change the security profiles and the way you've configured the software. Now, all of a sudden, a system that was built for compliance is now not compliant, not because the software is not compliant, but because you configured it and implemented it in a way that's not compliant. And so is that something you see as well?
Yeah, and I would even take it a step further, and thanks for bringing this up, is let's say you started out compliant. Let's pick Mexico as an example. You're compliant in Mexico, everything is good. Well, unfortunately, Mexico changes the requirements or adds new requirements every year or so. And so now what's reconfiguring or recustomizing that in SAP just for Mexico? Is that on your rollout? It probably came out of the blue. Didn't know anything was coming. Mexico just decided, okay, congratulations, here's some more changes that are coming. And are you going to be able to move quickly enough in your SAP environment to be able to do that? Whereas with Basware, again, that's what we do, right? We are designed to be compliant, both fiscally in each of these countries, but also commercially with your agreements and kind of the end-to-end process, so that we're built to handle that very quickly and nimbly to be able to adjust as these mandates change, which they do constantly, right? Even France, which has been in the works for 3+ years now, just announced some new tweak to their mandate that's going to go live in September. And if you're not staying on top, easily and nimble and configurable and able to make that change, it's a lot easier to do that in a Basware than it is in SAP.
Yeah, makes total sense. So it's an ongoing journey. Compliance isn't a one-time thing where you just roll out some software, call it good. It's constantly changing, and you've got to stay on top of that and have the tools that allow you to stay on top of that as well.
It is constantly changing all over the world, right? I gave you a couple examples, but he's coming online, and France is coming online later this year, and they will change their mandate. It will change the requirements next year, and Mexico changes, and Brazil is completely thinking about revamping theirs, and every country around the world who has an invoice mandate changes theirs on an annual basis pretty much. And so do you want to spend your time and effort staying on top of that and constantly having to update your systems, or do you want to just let Basware do it for you?
Right. Yeah. Makes total sense. Here's a question from Third Stage Consulting Group. I know them. I know a couple people over there. What strategies do you use to or advise clients on to ensure an ROI? So as you're going through this process, a client, SAP, they bring on Basware. What do you guys focus on to ensure that there's an ROI in the overall implementation?
So the first thing we do, and we work with folks like Third Stage, is really do an assessment up front to understand where are you today, right? So what are your automation and touchless? What happens from a fraud perspective? Are you paying on time? Are you optimizing your working capital? Trying to establish that benchmark of what the company is or what the potential customer is, where they are today. And then what we typically do, and I'm sure third stage would be similar, is say, okay, here's where you are today. Here's what best practice is. And if we can get you from here, where you are today, to best practice, what's the value of that in terms of reduced cost, reduced fines, eliminating fraud, the working capital benefits you can create, the above. And we develop a plan that's kind of our roadmap from how we're going to get you from here to there and what the value of that's going to be. And then from a Basware perspective, we are constantly having that conversation of, okay, we said we're going to get you from here to there. We've gone this far. Now here's what we need to do to move you from A to B, from B to C, C to D, so that you're getting value, and measure that all along the journey. In our quarterly business reviews, we have something called Value 360, where we're taking kind of that original plan and goals and working that plan and monitoring it together. We've even gone so far as actually building into the product, using AI to be able to monitor your processes and your metrics and simulate, if we make this change, here's what the impact will be on those goals and objectives and the ROI we set out. If you make this change in how we're doing things, you will go from, a million, I'm just making this up, €1 million a year, 1.5 million euros a year in benefit, or 3 million euros of benefit, or 10 million, whatever that might be. So we can do it right in the system and give you full visibility, which I think is really important. But it starts with, again, assessing, developing that joint roadmap and plan, measuring it, monitoring it relentlessly, and constantly be optimizing against that. That's kind of how we view the world. And we frame that all in kind of what we call our Value 360 approach.
Really interesting. I wasn't aware of that Value 360 approach, but that's pretty cool. And one other thing too, I mentioned it before, I'll mention it again. If you want to learn more about Basware, just read about the product, see where it fits into your invoice lifecycle management, or how it might complement your SAP or ERP implementation. Just scan the QR code right here. You can learn more about Basware there. I'll leave that up here for another second. But Pammy on TikTok says SAP is not the same internationally, but it's easy to operate and can implement a lot of functions. So I think that's a good explanation of why this is so important, because SAP is arguably the most diverse, the most broad, the most robust ERP system in the marketplace. But with that flexibility, and with that breadth comes gaps in functionality and things you really need to tighten up. And so I think that's a great point.
And I would just add, that's exactly why 600 ERP companies have chosen Basware for invoice lifecycle management, right? Because that's all we do. We have to be the best. Implements what SAP does. So it's as we say, better together. Right? SAP and Basware are better together.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, get the best of all worlds. Mrs. Jones Knows Business on TikTok says, "Hey, haven't seen you in forever." Well, glad to see you again. Thanks for being here. So thanks to everyone joining over here on TikTok and watching both streams. And then someone did ask, why aren't you just watching the streams merged or consolidated? Well, there's technical limitations there. If only Basware had a solution for my podcast streaming limitations, but you guys probably are going to stick to what you're good at.
We stay in our lanes. We're good at invoice lifecycle management. We've been doing it for over 40 years, and we're just going to stick to what we're good at.
Right. It's smart. It's easy to get out over your skis there. So what about during transitions? Let's talk about migrations, multi-ERP environments where you can get fraud and duplicate payments as an issue. What are you seeing, and where are companies most exposed during these transition windows from their legacy ERP system or systems to an S/4HANA or to a more modern ERP system? And how can customers bypass that or mitigate that risk?
Yeah, so that is one of the big risks that our customers see when they're going through a cloud transformation. Is that moment systems operating on-prem versus the cloud, to one or the other, or to one instance. That's where fraudsters seem to be incredibly knowledgeable and be able to really attack.
That's really interesting. I want to dive into what Jason just said, because it's one of the most underappreciated risks in any cloud migration. And that is that the most dangerous moment in your project isn't go live. It's the months around go live when fraudsters strike. And That's something we don't talk a lot about, the cybersecurity and the risk of fraud while you're in the middle of transitioning. You're transitioning from one system to another. Some invoices are in the old system, some are in the new. Supplier records are being migrated. Approval workflows are being built. Bank account charges are flying around, or the changes are flying around. AP staff is stressed, distracted, spread too thin, and they're approving things faster than they should. That's the time that fraudulent people are going to strike. The fraudsters know this. They specifically target customers that are in the middle of cloud migrations. They send fake invoices that look real. They impersonate suppliers, submit duplicate invoices to both the old and the new systems. They request bank and account changes, and they just take advantage of the chaos. And Basware's data, as you may recall, the data says that companies lose roughly 1 million for every 1 billion in spend to fraud. And that's just normal operations. During a migration, that number could actually be multiple times higher than that. So the lesson for all of us is you want to build fraud protection into your cloud migration plan from day one. You don't want to wait until after go live to figure it out. Don't assume your IT security team has it covered. They're focused on the infrastructure, not the invoices. AP fraud has its own discipline, and the bad actors are using AI now, so you need AI-powered defense. So if you're in the middle of an SAP or ERP migration right now and you don't have a fraud monitoring strategy specifically for invoice processing, you're pretty exposed. So you want to fix that right away and make sure that your leadership team is aware of that as well. Now we're going to take a quick break. We've got a lot more to cover, a lot more we're going to get into here with Jason. We'll be back with more Transformation Ground Control. Stick around.
I met her in a club down in Old Soho where you drink champagne and it tastes like Coca-Cola. C-O-L-A.
If you're leading a digital transformation or ERP initiative and you want to avoid the costly mistakes that most organizations make, that's where Third Stage Consulting comes in. We are an independent and technology advisory firm, meaning that we don't sell software, we don't take commissions from vendors. Our only job is to protect your interests and be on your side. We help executives and project teams plan, deliver, and recover digital transformations and ERP projects, reducing risk, improving adoption, and delivering real business value. If you want clarity before you commit to your digital strategy, or if something feels off track to you, feel free to reach out to us at thirdstage-consulting.com, and my team and I would be happy to help.
The last thing you want to have happen is for your digital transformation to end up in court. I've been doing this for 20 years and I have seen everything. My name is Marcus Harris. I'm a software and technology attorney focusing my practice on drafting and negotiating software-related contracts and litigating software disputes across the country. Feel free to reach out to us at taftlaw.com. We'd love to talk to you about the litigation process and what you can expect.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 274. My name is Eric Kimberly, and here with Jason Kurtz from Basware. We're talking about integrated lifecycle management, all things related to finance, accounting, accounts payable, with ERP and SAP implementations, risk management, tons of stuff. Let's get back into the conversation.
Multiple invoices sometimes because they don't know where to send it, right? And maybe you haven't heard anything back from the company. So they send it to an old place. Now they send it to the new place. Now you've seen it twice. And if you aren't able to sit on top and cross instances, you're at risk of paying things more than once, right? And that happens all the time in these cloud transformation journeys. And so what Basware has a solution that sits on top of that, or kind of in front of your ERPs, and is that ingestion engine that is monitoring for fraud using AI and 800 different algorithms to constantly be checking, what is that invoice? Is it from the right supplier? Is it going to the right place? Does it have all the right information on it? Ensuring that it's not, that there's no duplicate, looking for duplicate invoice numbers and things like that. That's what you need. It can cost companies millions and millions of dollars. And that moment when you're going through that transformation, when you've just spent tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars to go through that journey, that's the last thing you want to do is be the victim of fraud. And so Basware sits in front of that and sits on top of that and really can protect you at that moment of most vulnerability.
Yeah. And it's becoming such a big deal now. Fraud, cybersecurity, phishing scams. I mean, there's so many different issues that organizations need to face now. It's getting more and more difficult in that legacy environment to be able to mitigate that.
And the other thing, look, unfortunately, you got to be careful, even in your internal employees, right? Sometimes bad actors get to them, or they do crazy things. And so again, having a solution that is looking for irregularities, anomalies, duplicate payments, changes in where payments are going and being made, that's critically important. And so unfortunately, the era of AI has made fraudsters much more powerful and have a lot of new capabilities, and you need AI based solutions to protect yourself from those AI attempts. And so I would just say, I I don't think there's a company out there that hasn't had these phishing attempts, fraud attempts. It just happens. It is unfortunately a daily occurrence for most companies these days. And so to stay on top of that, you really need AI based solutions to be protecting you, because the fraudsters keep getting smarter and smarter and better and better.
Yeah. Yeah. And what's scary is thinking about the fraudsters using AI to potentially, to get more traction there. And speaking of AI, I don't want you to think that this whole ILM thing was a Trojan horse just to get to AI, but we can't have a conversation here without getting into AI. Where is AI genuinely moving the needle in AP and invoice processing today? And where do you think it's still mostly marketing noise? So what's the reality of where we stand with AI in the world of AP and invoice processing?
Yeah, I mean, the good news is AI can be used across the entire invoice process today, and is used across that entire invoice lifecycle management process, which is great. I think we did a survey of finance teams and asked them, where is AI providing the most value? And AP is at the top, right? So there are real demonstrable use cases for AI driving value for companies today. And if you ask finance experts, they would say AP is a great place to start. So if you haven't started or you haven't seen the value, AP is great. So whether it's invoice ingestion and using AI to read that invoice and get better data on it, that's one place. If it's an invoice that comes in and it's missing a GL code and you need to figure out what the right GL code is, AI can do that for you. If the invoice doesn't match beyond a simple 2 or 3 way match, and you need an n-way match, AI can help you do that, right? And apply matching logic and reason to it. If you have an exception and it's got to go to someone for approval, AI can predict who the approver should be based on historical, right? So it learns. So AI is, and we already talked about the fraud piece, it is literally end to end. You want to optimize your processes to improve touch rate, AI can help you do that. So I think it's really everywhere. And I give you one great example. So I mentioned the GL coding as we have a solution that uses AI to predict GL codes when they're missing on an invoice. In 2025, we had 17 million instances of AI being used to predict the GL code that was missing on behalf of our customers. And the great news is 81% of the time, we got it exactly right with the number one answer. So when we come back with a GL code recommendation, we rank them 1 to 5 and we give probability codes. So our number one was right 81% of the time. And it started lower and it just keeps on growing and getting better and better every single day. So think about that. That's over 10 million instances where somebody didn't have to touch an invoice to get the GL code right that was missing because our AI predicted it. So there's real ROI in value in that case. And I'd say, so that's just one great example of many where AI is providing value. And I would say, again, if you haven't started using AI in AP or invoice lifecycle management, you should. There's real demonstrable ROI.
Yeah, great points. Pammy on TikTok said you can add the approvals on the system, and GL coding is used on an FI invoice, not the MM invoice. So it sounds like Pammy's deep in the world of SAP here. So thanks for the clarification of how SAP is configured. Got a lot of SAP type people and users here in the TikTok world. Here's an interesting, a little bit off. It's not off topic, but it's somewhat related to what we're talking about. This is from Goot on TikTok. Says, "Hi, Mr. Eric. As a beginner, what technical skills that should I study in this path?" So, in other words, like if someone's starting out today and they're interested in this whole topic of invoice management or just ERP, SAP in general, what would you advise them to do to get started?
Well, it's an interesting question. So I think, and I'm not, I'm not an SAP technical person, so I'm not sure I'd be the best person to recommend on that. But I'd say, here's what I would tell you. If you're just getting started and AP and invoice lifecycle management is an area you're interested in, I would say the number one thing you're going to need to know going forward is, how do you work with AI agents, right? Because literally laced across that invoice lifecycle management process end to end, how do you work with and manage AI agents as your digital teammates and think that way? So you are the leader and manager over agents who are almost like employees, but they're digital teammates and employees. Learning how to do that is probably the number one thing I would recommend for you. And fortunately, you can go to Basware.com. We've got a great class on doing that, but it is really bridging this gap between that I think is out there, which is boards, CEOs, CFOs saying, hey, we've got to do something with AI or we're going to fall behind and we need to get value out of it. And your day-to-day people who are in AP, your clerks, AP managers, or in any function who are saying, whoa, AI, I'm a little worried about that. Like, is it going to take my job? How's it going to change things? Learning how to manage those agents is the best way to future-proof your career. And I would tell you, AI gets rid of the non-value added, not great fun stuff to work on, and really allows you to focus on the really interesting aspects of it. But you got to know how to work with agents and be able to tune that. And I think that's going to be the skill set of the future.
Right. And Healthy Skin on TikTok wants to know the website again. So I apologize to those on TikTok. You can't see the QR code that all the other platforms can see it, but it's just basware.com, right?
Yep. BASWARE.com.
Yep.
Basware.com.
Basware with one S, BASWARE.com. You can learn more about it there. So sorry. Thanks for calling that out. Healthy Skin on TikTok, that you can't see the QR code that I keep pointing to. So thanks for clarifying that. So here's a comment. I'm not going to put it on the screen just because it's a longer one, but I'll read it here quickly. This is from Mario on LinkedIn. Mario says, great explanation. Sometimes ROI is the wrong question and answer. In other words, it's not about maximizing value with X% fixed costs. Invoice management system is more about avoiding fiscal and tax fees avoidance, which is more related to risk management. So I'm curious, do you agree with that? I mean, because I kind of agree, but I also think there's a real outside of compliance.
Yeah, I think there's both. I don't think it's either or. I think it's got to be both, right? I think there is real ROI and value from better automation and using AI in that invoice lifecycle management. I think there are real hard dollar savings. But two, there are real risks of those fiscal compliance failures and fines. And that is real, right? As I said, U.S. companies are 5 times more likely to pay fines than European companies. So out there, and even European companies are being fined. And so I would say every dollar or euro or whatever currency you're on that you're paying in fines is a wasted dollar that should never happen. And so, but why not get both of those values, right? You should be able to get both. I wouldn't want to leave either one on the table.
Exactly, especially when I imagine a lot of organizations don't know. I mean, they understand the compliance and the regulatory fines because it is what you get fined, you pay it.
Yep.
ROI is a little fuzzier, but one aspect of ROI that I bet a lot of companies don't fully understand is, what about internal fraud or nefarious actors that slip in POs? Like, we get this at third stage. We get people, like, we get POs. Like, there's this one that's been just hounding our AP department because they insist that they gave me some executive coaching worth $50,000 and I need to pay the bill.
Right.
And I said, I've not gotten executive from whoever this is. I haven't gotten executive coaching for $50,000 from anyone, but especially not whoever this is. Right. But it's things like that. It's like, how many times at a big company does someone say, oh, okay, Eric approved it or Jason approved, whatever, so I guess we'll go ahead and pay it. And so how much money is lost? It's not a fine. It's not like an efficiency ROI, but it's money out the door that shouldn't have gone out the door.
Yeah, so we have studies that would tell you that it's about $1 million or euros for every $1 billion or euros in spend gets paid to fraudulent actors, basically.
Wait, say that number again. I'm sorry.
It's $1 million for every billion.
$1 million for every $1 billion is
In
lost
spend.
through.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
1 million is lost for every $1 billion you haven't spent.
So 1%. There's a
1/10 of 1%. Yeah.
1/10 of 1%. So you could do that. I mean, there's some good math right there. If you're a multi-billion-dollar company, you've got millions of dollars probably of lost money that you know of. I mean, that might be more if you could quantify and track all of it down.
That's right.
So Mario has a quick follow-up comment here. Says, so it's both ROI related to total cost of ownership and risk management related to fiscal fines avoided. I think that's a fair thing there. What about efficiency? Do you see efficiency ROI as well? Is that something that your customers are focused on beyond the other ROI aspects we've talked about?
Yeah, 100%. Right. So, that's part of that journey to getting to, 100% automated or 100% touchless, right? Customers want to go from, let's say, a common measurement that a lot of folks, they're trying to measure their touchless rate. So is it 10, 20, 30, 50, 90% touchless on the invoices that are coming in? But the productivity or efficiency metric that they really look at is how many invoices does each FTE process, right? And so if you're not super automated and you're not using AI, you might be 10 or 20,000 invoices per FTE, whereas a really finely tuned, highly automated, using to drive efficiency and effectiveness, you might be at 60, 70, 80,000 per invoices per FTE. So there's a real difference in those kind of metrics if you're able to optimize.
Yeah. So bringing this all full circle then, if I'm an executive or a leader, I'm involved in an SAP or ERP implementation, I'm concerned about invoice lifecycle management, I don't know where to start. I'm just trying to get going here. If you had to leave us with 2 or 3 tips or pieces of advice or wisdom, what would that be?
Yeah, I would say, one, it starts with ROI, right? Make sure you know where you ROI, and AP, invoice lifecycle management, is an area where you can absolutely, there are use case after use case study after case study of company after company that's driving real savings and real ROI. And so I would say start with that. 2, if you're going, clean core is a focus, right? Really take a look at the SAP partner ecosystem to understand where there are solutions like a Basware that actually advance your clean core journey and make it more clean by using a partner like us that's BTP and Clean Core certified, because I think that can be a huge benefit. And then a third, if you are operating in multiple countries, dealing with all these invoice mandates around the world, be aware, right? Get the right people in the room, understand how that affects your business and where you're operating, and bake that into your transformation journey. And make sure you're working with someone who can, solve that for you holistically, globally, versus trying to do, different solutions in every single country, which is really costly and inefficient. And really take a look at it from how do we drive benefits out of being compliant, not think about it as a cost or a tax of doing business in each country.
All right. Thanks, Jason. Great conversation. Appreciate having you on the show here today. Appreciate the audience questions. I hope y'all learned a lot. I learned a lot from this conversation, and really think that it's something that's underrated, not discussed enough in this industry. So I'm glad that Jason was here to talk about this. And there's some really interesting takeaways here as far as, the importance of lifecycle management and compliance. I wasn't aware of all these compliance changes that are happening here throughout the world right now. I just wasn't aware, especially the one in France. That sounds like it's pretty imminent, and maybe one of the more aggressive regulatory regimes as it relates to B2B accounts payable. So curious to hear from you. Have you run into any issues like this that we've talked about here in this episode? I'd love to hear your feedback. And as always, if you've got ideas for guests or topics, please reach out to me. If you'd like to learn more about Third Stage and how we can help you with your digital transformation, feel free to reach out. I'm happy to share notes with you, chat with you, whatever the case may be. So hope you enjoyed the episode. We'll see you next week on the next episode of Transformation Ground Control. Have a great week in the meantime, and we'll see you soon. Take care.
control.